well, first of all, before I introduce David, I want to say really quickly that if any of you all have not attended the book club that Sally Bibb and I founded for Rotary 13, we are having an amazing time. Yes, he's giving us the thumbs up there. So we're having an amazing time, and we would love to have you join us anytime. We meet monthly, and we read, and then we have very, very interesting discussions. So please think about that. And then today, I'm so happy, we had David Nichols here. David is the leading expert on the Eisenhower presidency, and he is here from Winfield, Kansas, actually, which is kind of fun. And there was a great review of his new book, McCarthy, in the Wall Street Journal just recently, so you can take a look at that. But he's going to tell you some fascinating information that has never been known before about Ike and McCarthy. So please help me welcome to Rotary 13, David Nichols.
Well, for an old guy like me, being in a place like this reminds me of that great old song, Everything's Up in Days in Kansas City. And I take this as an omen, because I secretly have believed that this book would make a great movie. And so I'm going to take Dee with you in the movie theater today as an omen to that end. But I will not star. I want to be clear about that. Okay. One of the problems is, who can they get to play Dwight Eisenhower? That's always a problem. It's great to be with you. I appreciate being invited here. And I love Rotary. I used to be a member. I'm not anymore, but I still have enormous respect for this great, great service club. March 27th, 1953, Dwight Eisenhower won a big victory over Senator Joseph McCarthy. Ike's nominee for the ambassador to the Soviet Union, Charles Bolin, was confirmed by the Senate 74-13. But Ike was upset. McCarthy has the blood to run for the presidency in 1956. The president declared to his top aides. Ike slapped his knee and thundered, "The only reason I would consider running again would be to run against him." Knowing Eisenhower, he probably punctuated that declaration with a theologically incorrect expletive. Think about it, you figure it out. Flash forward to December 2nd, 1954. On that date, the United States Senate formally censured Joe McCarthy by a vote of 67-22. After censure, when McCarthy stood up to speak on the chamber floor, the chamber went empty. When the senator sat down with other senators in the Senate dining room, his colleagues would offer lame excuses and leave. The bands of reporters who had hung on every word were gone. How did this happen? What I'll share with you is a short peek into a very complicated story, and if I confuse you, I will only tell you that the book is a whole lot better than the speech. In terms of mystery stories, I love mysteries. This is a howdunit, not a whodunit. In a whodunit, we know there's a crime, but we must follow the clues to find out who committed it. In a howdunit, we know who did it, and the question is how and why. Until now, we, meaning even historians, people in my profession, have assumed that Dwight Eisenhower was cowardly in his response to Senator Joe McCarthy, refusing to use the bullet pulpit against him. Ike adamantly refused to, quote, get down in the gutter with McCarthy. He refused, in fact, to even mention his name in public. In 1953, due to Eisenhower's election, the Republicans captured a one-vote majority in the Senate, and McCarthy became chair of the Government Operations Committee and its Permanent Investigative Subcommittee. In that capacity, the senators subpoenaed witnesses, conducted one senator hearings, accused witnesses of guilt by association, and labeled as obviously communist anyone who dared to invoke constitutional protections against self-incrimination. McCarthy hired Roy Cohn, S-C-O-H-N, a young legal prodigy, as his subcommittee's chief counsel. I don't know whether that's going to stay or not. Cohen insisted that McCarthy add G. David Schein, the handsome son of a wealthy New York family, as an unpaid chief consultant. Cohen and Schein's intimate relationship would eventually trigger the 1954 Army-McCarthy hearing. A word about that lover scandal. The 1950s was a horrendously homophobic period. Those of us who are in the room that are old enough to remember know it was. Just the rumor, not the fact, just the rumor that someone was gay could cost them their job. And it was widely believed at that time that homosexuals were security risks because the communists might blackmail them. In July 1953, David Schein received his draft notice from the Army. Thereafter, Roy Cohn, backed by McCarthy, constantly harassed the Army to give Schein a special assignment that would keep him with McCarthy's subcommittee and, of course, with him. When Cohn failed in that
Thank you.
pardon. When Cohn failed in that effort, he persuaded Joe McCarthy to launch hearings into the United States Army. He did that with a 5-star Army general in the White House. And with those hearings, Joe McCarthy, in effect, signed his own political death warrant. William Ewald wrote a book a generation ago with a whodunit title, Who Killed Joe McCarthy? Ewald's final conclusion was somewhat ambiguous. Mine is not. Ewald's, Dwight Eisenhower did it. Ike and his trusted aides launched a clandestine operation designed to wrap a gay lover scandal around the neck of a prestigious United States senator in the president's own party in an election year. That's about as tough as it gets. That is what the Army-McCarthy hearings were about. So let's look at how he did it. In January 1954, McCarthy's prestige was at its zenith with a Gallup poll rating of 50% approval, 29% disapproval. By then, Eisenhower had concluded that McCarthy was more than a nuisance. He was a threat to the president's foreign policy goals, to his legislative program, and to his party's and his own electoral prospects. About the time that David Schein got his draft notice, Eisenhower called Fred Seaton in Nebraska. That's S-E-A-T-O-N. The Seatons, a newspaper family, came from Manhattan. Some of you know where that is, down the road. I'm going there later today to meet with the Seaton family. Fred's father had been a secretary to Senator Joseph L. Briscoe, who had endorsed Ike's application to West Point. In 1937, young Fred moved to Nebraska to become the publisher of the Hastings Daily Tribune. Upon the death of Nebraska's Republican senator in December 1951, the governor appointed Seaton to that seat for a year. In the Senate, Fred Seaton developed a fairly friendly relationship with Joe McCarthy. So in July 1953, I called Fred Seaton. One gentleman was telling me earlier about Eisenhower, how Eisenhower didn't just ask people to do things like the general way was, he ordered them. And he in effect called Fred Seaton and asked him to take a redesigned assistant secretary position in the Pentagon, in the Defense Department. He would serve as the Pentagon's liaison with Congress and the press, and among other things, manage matters related to Joe McCarthy. I told Charles Wilson, the Secretary of Defense, that he'd always looked at Seaton as, quote, a reserve division, ready to go into action. McCarthy's hearings into alleged communist subversion in the Army continued for months. Eisenhower wrote in his memoirs that by January 1954, Joe McCarthy was riding high. Then came the turning point. On January 21st, Ike's top aides convened in the Attorney General's office. During that meeting, Army Counsel John Adams reported on the details of McCarthy's and Cohn's repeated attempts to secure special privileges for David Stein. Chief of Staff Sherman Adams ordered John Adams to prepare a report, and John Adams sent the White House a stack of documents in mid-February. Shortly thereafter, the White House returned those documents to Fred Seaton at the Pentagon with secret presidential orders to edit them into a report for publication. Meanwhile, McCarthy continued hearings on the Army. He savagely grilled General Ralph Zwicker about Irving Perez, a dentist under his command, whom McCarthy claimed was a communist. Now, Ralph Zwicker was one of Ike's boys, a hero of the war in Europe. But McCarthy, in that long hearing, ultimately delivered the ultimate insult to this war hero. He charged that Ralph Zwicker was, quote, not fit to wear the uniform of the United States Army. Eisenhower, on vacation in California, was incensed when he heard about the attack on Zwicker, but as usual, he said nothing to the press. Ike returned to Washington, but on February 24th, he returned to Washington on February 24th, only to find out that Army Secretary Robert Stevens, that very day, had naively agreed to a secret meeting with Joe McCarthy and the other Republicans on his subcommittee. The group talked Stevens into signing an agreement that the newspapers quickly labeled a surrender to McCarthy. And when Stevens arrived back at the Pentagon that afternoon, Fred Seaton bluntly told him, "Bob, you've been had." The next morning, the New York Times ran a devastating front-page photograph of McCarthy whispering in Stevens' ear. Newspapers also settled on another false conclusion, that because Eisenhower had arrived back at the White House the same day as Stevens' meeting with McCarthy, the president must have ordered Stevens to surrender to the senator. Press Secretary James Haggerty described the president as, quote, very mad and getting fed up. That states it mildly. Dwight Eisenhower was having a full-blown presidential temper tantrum. This was the president thundered about his army. This guy McCarthy is going to get in trouble over this, he thundered. I'm not going to take this one lying down. My friends tell me that it won't be long in this army stuff before McCarthy starts using my name instead of Stevens. He's ambitious. He wants to be president. He's the last guy in the world who will ever get there if I have anything to say. In early March 1954, the Eisenhower forces exploited two important events. On March 9, 1954, Republican Senator Ralph Flanders of Vermont attacked Joe McCarthy in a speech on the floor of the United States Senate. Flanders asked a loaded question about McCarthy. To what party does he belong? One must conclude, the Vermont senator said, that his is a one-man party, and that party's name is McCarthyism. McCarthy, Flanders moved, he did say this about Irving Perez and others. McCarthy, quote, dons his war paint, he goes into his war dance, he emits his war hoops, he goes forth to battle, and proudly returns with the scalp of a pink army dentist. Flanders had already sent copies of his remarks to Eisenhower, who publicly commended them. That same evening, March 9th, Edward R. Murrow eloquently condemned McCarthy on his See It Now television program. That's still available on TV if you ever get a chance to watch it. Do. Murrow derided the senator as a one-man committee who had demoralized the State Department and the Army. Murrow argued that, quote, the line between investigating and persecuting is a very fine one, and the junior senator from Wisconsin has stepped over it repeatedly. Murrow closed with devastating eloquence. We will not walk in fear one of another. We will not be driven by fear into an age of unreason. It is no time, Murrow said,
for people who oppose Senator McCarthy's methods to keep silent. We cannot, he declared, defend freedom abroad by deserting it at home. Those are words from the ages, I think. 2 days later, on March 11th, Fred Seaton released the 34-page Shine report on behalf of the Army. On behalf of the Army, understand, not the White House. No one knew that the White House was actually behind it. Press Secretary Jim Haggerty called the Shine report a pip, and he said it shows constant pressure by Cohn to get Shine a soft Army job with Joe in and out of the threats. Haggerty believed that that report would bust things wide open. It did. The result was a firestorm of controversy, leading to the televised Army McCarthy hearings. For 2 months, now folks, you gotta remember, in those days, there were about 3 major TV networks, not the hundreds that we have these days. For 2 months, the American public watched as the cameras unmasked Joe McCarthy as the obnoxious bully he was. In May, the hearings interrupted into demands by both parties for testimony about that January 21st meeting, at which the Eisenhower forces had first examined the McCarthy-Cohn-Shine relationship. Ike refused to permit his personal advisors to be subpoenaed, or that would reveal his own involvement. So on May 17th, Eisenhower invoked executive privilege, citing historic precedents for the protection of presidential advisors. In response, McCarthy made an extraordinary challenge. He challenged government employees to disobey their superiors and report directly to him because, quote, their oath to protect and defend this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic, is a commitment that towers far above any presidential secrecy directly. Eisenhower shot down McCarthy's tirade with a statement issued under the Attorney General's name, but not the President's. Then I called his press secretary into the Oval Office and vented his rage against, quote, the complete arrogance of McCarthy. Pacing behind his desk, Eisenhower thundered, we all know who know Eisenhower, that when they did the notes on all these documents, they would censor out all the profanity. That I could swear like the soldier he was. Never in public, never with people he didn't know. But anyway. Eisenhower thundered that McCarthy's challenge for federal employees to disobey their superiors, quote, amounts to nothing but a wholesale subversion of public service. McCarthy, he barked, is making exactly the same plea of loyalty to him that Hitler made to the German people. Both tried to set up personal loyalty within the government, while both were using the pretense of fighting communism. McCarthy is trying deliberately to subvert the people we have in government, people who are sworn to obey the law, the Constitution, and their superior officers. I think this is the most disloyal act. Let me try that line again. I think this is the most disloyal act we have ever had by anyone in the government of the United States. You probably would not forgive me if I didn't mention Joe Welch's famous confrontation with Joe McCarthy on June 9, 1954. McCarthy charged that Welch had in his law firm a young man named Fred Fisher, who had once been associated with an allegedly pro-communist organization. A hush fell over the room, and McCarthy hurled that accusation. And Joe Welch, the Army attorney, sat with his head in his hands, staring at the table. McCarthy was pacing around, ordering aides to retrieve the file on Fred Fisher. Welch repeatedly tried to get McCarthy's attention without success. Finally, he declared, until this moment, Senator, I think I've never really gauged your cruelty or recklessness. Fred Fisher is starting what looks to be a brilliant career with us. Little did I dream, Welch continued, you would be so reckless and cruel as to do an injury to that lad. I fear he shall always bear a scar needlessly inflicted by you. I like to think that I'm a gentleman, but your forgiveness will have to come from someone other than me. McCarthy resumed his attack, however, on Fisher, and Welch interrupted with a commanding voice. Let us not assassinate this lad further, Senator. You have done enough. Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of decency? The Republicans, I should mention, made numerous attempts to the hearings went on for 2 months. And the Republicans made numerous attempts to shut down the hearings. But Eisenhower, behind the scenes, successfully vetoed ending them until mid-June because they were doing such damage to McCarthy. And when McCarthy himself sent a plea through the Secretary of the Army that ended, the President slapped his desk and shouted, no, we got the bastard right where we want him. By the time the hearings ended, McCarthy was upside down in the polls, 34% approval. In July 1954, Roy Cohn resigned to return to his New York law practice and eventually became the lead attorney and mentor for 13 years to one Donald Trump. That's another story. We'll talk about it later. It's not in the book. On December 2nd, 1954, McCarthy's senatorial colleagues censured him, as we noted before, by a vote of 67 to 22. 2 days later, Eisenhower invited Arthur Watkins, the senator from Utah, the chair of the censure committee, to the White House. Afterward, the president issued a statement commending Watkins for, quote, a very splendid job of managing the censure process. That was more than Joe McCarthy could take. On December 7th, he walked into the first hearing of the subcommittee in months and apologized openly to the American people for supporting Dwight Eisenhower for president. But the struggle was over. In a June 1955 meeting with the legislative leaders, Eisenhower repeated a joke that was making the rounds in Washington. The president says, quote, it's no longer McCarthyism, he said, it's McCarthyism. Eisenhower wrote an article for the Reader's Digest just prior to his death. Well, I edited out the harshest criticisms of McCarthy. He could not resist writing, quote, what a lot of people, even today, don't know is that behind the scenes, I was doing all I could to assist those who were wrongly accused. And in many cases, my efforts were effective. Eisenhower recalled that once the struggle with McCarthy was over, a critic of his approach to McCarthy said to him, my gosh, Mr. President, you were right about McCarthy. And a smiling Eisenhower responded, sometimes I am. Dwight D. Eisenhower died on March 28, 1969. His article, We Must Avoid the Perils of Extremism, was published the following month. And for all his editing, Dwight Eisenhower had finally, publicly denounced Joe McCarthy. Thank you. Do we have time for Q&A? We do.
But
Thank you for your presentation today. 2 questions. Why didn't Harry Truman do something other than just a little bit of lip service regarding McCarthy? And 2, how come it took them, X number of years before they came down on McCarthy the way they did, Mr. Nichols?
and that's related to Truman again. Well, Eisenhower thought Truman made a mistake because he did speak out against McCarthy. He did use the bully pulpit against him. And at the end, by 1953, though, McCarthy was only more and more popular, which to me shows the wisdom
It's hard for us to understand, we like to rate presidents on what they vote. We like to rate them by what they say. But I got convinced that giving presidential attention to McCarthy would just only enhance his prestige. The Truman made that mistake, and he also thought he would just really love McCarthy and do the more extreme things, because McCarthy just had to have attention. And so he thought Truman was wrong. I can't misjudge Truman too much for that. It was a different time, and maybe the time wasn't right until Eisenhower acted on it.
George?
Can you give us some more information about shine and cone, or just cone?
Now, could you give us more information about shine and cone, or just cone?
Well, Cone, we don't have time here. He was a legal prodigy. He'd been involved in the Rosenberg prosecutions. He was only 25 years old when he signed on to Joe McCarthy. And so he was very bright, very sharp, and totally unethical. And so I'm not sure what more we can get into at this point. A book I could recommend to you that's really worth reading is Cone's own book about McCarthy. And he dictates an autobiography just before his death. He died of AIDS in 1986. And he dictates that, and it gives quite a bit of background if you would like some reading about it. As for David Schein, his family was a wealthy hotel family in New York. And some people will probably look at my book and say, I know absolutely true they were lovers. I'm convinced that it was the case. At minimum, Roy Cohn was infatuated with David Schein. And what confuses people in part was that David Schein, a couple of years later, married a former Miss Universe candidate and had 6 children. Having said that, folks, this LGBT thing, the B does stand for something. And you have to keep in mind that gay men quite often got married and had children in those days, and it still happens to some extent. But I'm satisfied. Authors have been reluctant to talk about that for obvious reasons. When you talk about it in the 50s, where it was so homophobic to a modern audience, I know I'm running the risk of being really misunderstood. I think that's probably all we have time to share.
Could you revisit the comment you made, because it kind of just went by quickly, about Trump's mentor?
Well, Roy Cohn went back to New York, and was first, and Donald Trump and his father were being sued by the federal government for discrimination in their housing in 1973, and they consulted with Roy Cohn, and Roy Cohn told him, tell him to go to hell and take him to court. That was his advice, and from that point on, Roy Cohn was not just an attorney, but by all accounts, a close mentor to Donald Trump. Taught him how to take on his enemies, taught him how to never apologize to anybody for anything, taught him how to exploit people's fears. He helped him craft one prenuptial agreement with one of his wives. He helped set up mafia-related financing for some of his projects. They were just very, very close until Cohn died in 1986. Now, I don't know that we can read too much into that. The temptation for people like me is to say Donald Trump learned a lot of what he does now from Roy Cohn and kind of imitated Joe McCarthy. That's probably too simplistic. You know, they are their own people. If Roy Cohn hadn't existed, Donald Trump would do some of the things he does anyway, I think. Yes, anybody else?
Yes. So do you see in today's environment where it would be possible to have another situation like the McCarthy hearings happening again?
Oh, I think they're talking a lot about hearings in Washington, aren't they? You know, there was news on the news today. Richard Hofstadter, a great historian, talked about the paranoid style in American politics. He said comes on about every generation. About every generation, we Americans just really get scared. It was a big Red Scare right after World War One, because of the revolution in Russia, among other things. And then we have this big scare in the 50s, and now we're scared of terrorism. That when people are fearful, demagogues can exploit that fear. And I don't know what will happen. It takes a long time for these things to develop, whether there will be any hearings comparable to the McCarthy. I doubt we would ever have anything that was on television for 2 solid months like that was. But I've learned not to predict American history and future. Not predict the future. I can do okay with the past, but not the future.
Buddy?
Could you tell us a little bit of how you came up with all this secret information?
Well, it's at the Eisenhower Library primarily. That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. Because Fred Seaton, Dwight Eisenhower, during the Army McCarthy hearing, ordered Fred Seaton to collect all the McCarthy documents he could find everywhere in the government, especially in the Pentagon. And Fred Seaton collected thousands of such documents. And when he left the Pentagon to become the Secretary of the Interior, he took those with him, kept them in a locked file. Bill Ewald once told me, I mentioned he was an author, he said that Fred Seaton would look at that file, that locked file, and say, I'll never open that until you know who tells me to open it. He took those documents home with him to Nebraska after he left the government. Until finally, they were sent to the Eisenhower Library after he died. And so I had the opportunity to go through every page of those. And the other reason, why would I end up with that and other dollars have it? I'm sorry, my colleagues, I love them, but there's so many of them are East Coast people, and they just don't want to go to Abilene. There's a movie in Abilene, there's not very exciting restaurants. I mean, if you want entertainment, I love Abilene, but this is not the place, whereas I had the great fortune of living 2.5 hours from Abilene. And I'm gonna tell you, I did not know all this about Dwight Eisenhower when I started doing this. I had no idea. In fact, I've been typically raised and taught in my doctoral studies that he was not a very effective president. And boy, did I find out otherwise. The facts in this story, particularly for Fred Seaton.
David, thank you for your presentation.